So the lack of trust. Now, it's not like nations really trust each other like blood relatives or sworn friends or drinking partners or anything like that. But China's growth has engendered much more distrust and doubt than some other modern phenomenon. One reason is that China's defense budget has been growing very fast. As you'll see in the next slide, China's defense budget is not really very large compared to the United States, but it has continually grown and it continues to grow. China's approaches to spending that money, what it's trying to do with that money, is to create a strategy of area denial. They want to be able to deny other countries, specifically the US, from freely navigating in the waters close by, in the near seas. So they have developed a potent capability vis-a-vis their outstanding island and maritime claims. You can see here the last bullet on this slide is a quote that I won't read, that I think sums things up very well. That in essence they're focusing on their near seas. They're not focusing on trying to become so much of a blue water navy as people like to say. Blue water refers to deep water, like the Marianas Trench, like the Mid-Pacific. The Chinese are not apparently trying to develop a capability to reach, for example, into the Indian Ocean with any real effectiveness. They are seemingly more interested in their near seas. And this is a good thing to keep in mind as you read media accounts that tend to be a little bit overblown. It's not that they're wrong that there is growth in China's defense budget and the Chinese are trying to expand their capability to project power. It's just that China, their actual ability to do so, even at current trajectories with current trends, their actual ability to project power is going to be limited even 10 years from now. So go on to slide 13, and we can see a little bit more perspective here. There's you might have to look at these for a while before you grasp them, but the basic messages, I think, are that China's defense spending is growing, America's is shrinking, and China is the second biggest defense spender, but U.S. spending still dwarfs it. The thing that the United States has, and which is why you're not going to see really big defense cuts anytime soon in this country, is that the U.S. holds a distinct advantage in technological capability, which translated into things like striking power of a navy makes, for example, a U.S. destroyer quite lethal. A U.S. destroyer can kill things that are hundreds of miles away within minutes because they have surface-to-surface rockets, because they have satellite navigation capability, because they have not just deck guns, but they have weapons that can reach a long way, principally missiles. The French have these sorts of things. The British have these sorts of armaments. I remember visiting in Hong Kong some years ago. There were two Navy ships in dock. One was a U.S. destroyer, the other was an Australian destroyer. And I fell in with some people who were from both ships, and they were drinking, and you know how it is when you drink. tend to say more than you might want to. And they were comparing the armaments on their two ships, and the Australians were modest and truthful about how they could only kill things that were perhaps 20 miles away, while the Americans, with a ship that looked basically the same, could kill something 200, 300, 400 miles away. Plus, the anti-submarine capabilities on the two ships were vastly dissimilar. This is the sort of thing that is a big difference between the U.S. Navy and all the navies of Asia except for Japan. And nowadays, Australia is much more caught up. And then there are the South Koreans. If you take a look at this this table, you can see that if you add it up, the defense spending by the Indians, the Australians, the Japanese, and the South Koreans, together, they're spending more than China. And China is a distant second, again, to the United States. And so I think this gives some additional perspective to some of the more alarmist stuff we hear in the U.S. media about Chinese defense spending. It's substantial, but compared to what's going on with its neighbors, it's not overwhelming. As a matter of fact, there's more of a parity, I think, that is developing over time between these powers. Let's go on to slide 14. So that brings us to what could happen. I don't think, my personal opinion is that it's not happening yet, that there is not yet an arms race going on in East Asia, in particular in Southeast Asia. But there is the risk that an arms race could commence, a real arms race, where there are much more substantial percentages of gross national product being used to acquire ever more efficient bombs for military instead of doing other things. Much of the spending that is happening seems oriented towards simply controlling, again, the nearby seas, the ocean lanes of interest to each nation. Of course, these might overlap. But what each nation in the region does not want is it does not want to have neighboring countries ranging freely right on the borders of its territorial waters and able to make incursions when they feel like it. They want to ensure that anyone making an illegitimate incursion into their territorial waters and indeed into their broader economic zone, that they think twice about it. So the spending that's happening on things like anti-submarine warfare, capability, undersea radars, surface-to-surface missiles and the like, tend to be of local use rather than of a long-range nature. This is a development, however, that needs to be watched closely. In 10 years, when you are professionals, and I hope that you continue to learn about Asia and that your expertise is appreciated by your employer. In 10 years, when they are looking at what their risk is for doing business in Asia, either in a private capacity, a company, or if you're working for a government, or if you are working for a non-government organization, these developments between now and then will be very key to making decisions about how much in assets and people your organization will want to expose in Asia. Let's go on to slide 15, which brings us to a key point. So many people often assume that things as they are today will remain the same. They forget how things have changed over the decades, indeed over the centuries, and they might detect trends, but they often presume, especially if they're technical people, this is a very important point, engineers, people who are specialists in manufacturing, and others who have professional interests which take a long time to develop, are highly specialized, and you can only succeed if you're really smart. These are the people who tend to be the leaders of private corporations, for example, not so much of governments. They tend to be the big decision makers, and they tend not to understand historical processes because history classes for them in school were something they prefer to forget. So it's good to remember that things change. Continuity is only one part of history. People like to ask, will China have the largest economy by 2030 or so, 2050? Maybe they will, if everything remains steady and predictable, if the Uyghurs don't rise, if the Tibetans don't revolt, if the farmers don't start hanging communists by lampposts, if things don't go to hell in China, then it is possible that China will have the largest economy by mid-century. Then again, instead of being the world's largest opportunity, China might be the world's biggest problem. Will it remain united? I don't know. Maybe. Historical cycles suggest that China will eventually break up into warring kingdoms once again. Will the U.S. remain the big power that it is today? Well, we've been over, at the beginning of the course, we reviewed some of the reasons why, at least for the medium term, it is likely to remain the world's strongest nation. But 100 years from now, that's another story. What might happen with Mexico? We don't know. And will other Asian nations accept China's rise that we've described here? If their territories aren't threatened, if they can continue to trade without problems, then perhaps they will. Okay, we'll have one more audio to go and then we'll be done. We'll go on to slide 16 in the next audio.